Hello there everyone, welcome back to another video about the One Piece card game. Today I am making my second video in this OP04 review series. I'm going to be talking about all of the green cards. If you have not checked out the previous video in the series, you can check it out on my YouTube channel. At the time you're seeing this, it will have been probably uploaded in the last week. And if you're seeing this on Patreon, please do check out the rest of these. These will all be up at the same time on my Patreon, which you can find linked in the description below, the whole set plus my tier list. So please do check that out. I think $5 a month is pretty reasonable for what you're getting over there. Let's go ahead and get started with green, and green's interesting, this set. I think green is probably the largest victim of being overhyped relative to all the colours for how good they actually are. And I don't think that's to say necessarily that it's bad, but I think the expectation was it was going to be quite meta-dominant, and it's been fine to bad. Let's go ahead and talk about the leaders. So first we have Don Quixote do Flamingo here. This is a green-purple 4-life leader. At the end of your turn, set up to 2 of your Don cards as active. So firstly, let's not get it twisted. This is a phenomenally powerful leader. If you look at the utility you're getting here, right? Firstly, it's Shichibukai and Don Quixote Pirates traded, so we'll see that does matter and probably will matter into the future. The end of turn ability is incredibly generic. It lets you just splash 2-cost events in your deck for free. The color combination is incredibly synergistic, in particular for film cards, with a just sort of Doflamingo family splash at the moment. The best way to build the decks does seem to be that sort of film stuff. And on top of that, overall, the new cards I've got on the set are all very, very good. So I have to say, I think Doffy is a very good leader. I think it's only going to get better in the future. We know that there are starter decks coming out that are going to support this leader. Plus, we know that there is future support that is very likely going to make this leader much better. So I think there is a lot to look forward to if you are a Doflamingo enthusiast. Next, we have Isho. So this is green-black. This is probably the leader I am second most excited for in this set. It seems like it's got to be good, and yet we just can't figure out a way to make it good. Maybe eventually. But, okay, so what does it do? Okay, well, firstly, black and green. Very, very powerful color combo, because black gives you access to the kind of cost reduction that is going to turn a lot of the powerful green cards into overdrive. But on top of that, you have Don 1 to give all your opponent's characters -1 cost. Can be very, very relevant. And at the end of your turn, you pay 1 and you untap one of your characters with a cost of 5 or less. So realistically, this is a good effect because it's letting you swing with blockers and untap them and maintain their ability to block. It's letting you just keep your characters safe, essentially. Now, this ability is not actually as good as in practice as we ended up seeing, just because it ends up being a little bit difficult to use all of the time. It is, you know, having to constantly dedicate a Don can be a little bit challenging, but certainly there is a lot to like about this leader, and I think it's one to keep an eye on, and I'm sure a build will eventually develop that is quite good. But definitely the worst of the 2 green leaders. So moving into the actual character cards, we'll start off with Viola. So this is a 2k counter, 3/3. On your opponent's attack, you can pay 2 to rest up to one of your opponent's Don cards. This is basically never going to come up. Your opponent's always going to be able to play around it by just using all their Don, or attaching, you know, at the bare minimum, you know, its stats are pretty negligible and it's quite overcosted. Mainly you're using this because it's a 2k counter and it's Don Quixote Pirates traded, so it is searchable. So that's the reason you want to play it, if you are playing that more Don Quixote Pirates focused version of Doffy. Then we have got Eric. So this is a 1/2 1k counter. Activate main, you may rest this character to rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less. This is something I think is going to have long-term potential in lore. It's a 1-cost green, so you always do want to be aware that something like lore is always going to have access to this. It is also East Blue traded, which can be relevant potentially, but obviously, you know, at the moment this is not doing anything significant, but this could be like a very nice tool in the lore mirror match, for example, as and when that becomes a major part of the meta. But yeah, this is just something to be aware exists, but it's not really majorly impactful at the moment. 6/8 for green. Vanillas are very, very powerful, so we always like to see them. Then we've got Sugar. So this is a 2/0, 1k counter. On the opponent's turn, once per turn, when your opponent plays a character card, if your leader is Don Quixote Pirates traded, rest up to one of your opponent's characters, and then you rest this card. And then on play, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So obviously, very powerful on play, a very powerful continuous effect on the opponent's turn. Unfortunately, this is relatively easy to play around, not super great into the meta. Most of the meta decks are able to just immediately deal with this, right? For example, red is just going to Marco it, black is going to very easily remove it, blue can bounce it, you know, like most of the colors that are currently relevant in the format have a very easy way to deal with this card, but this into something like yellow is very difficult for you to deal with. I mean, what, they're going to Thunderbolt your sugar? Possibly, but I mean, you know, it's not ideal. So it's the kind of card where it's going to depend on the meta, how powerful this actually ends up being for that second effect. But even for that first effect, it can potentially be worth it. I mean, it's a strictly better Cat Viper, and we saw just how good Cat Viper was. So yeah, overall, I think this is a very, very good card. Obviously, you're going to be playing it in Doffy no matter what. The question is going to be what number. And then we've got Giola. This is a 4/4, 1k counter on the opponent's attack, pay 2, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. I think this is, again, one of those cards that it seems like it might be good on paper, obviously very good in the context of the leader, but very, very bad stats, and kind of easy to play around. So yeah, the same sort of situation where probably not worth playing. Then we've got Senor Pink. This is a 3/5, when attacking, pay 1. If your leader is Don-Quixote Pirates traded, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less. Then set up to one of your Don cards as active at the end of the turn. So this is interesting. Personally, I think this is just a worse version of Okiku. Like, I appreciate that you are getting to untap the Don at the end, so you are getting that that back, but I just don't think that you need that in Doffy. In the context of the deck you're actually going to be playing this in, I would rather have the additional reach of something like Okiku than playing Senor Pink, which I think is a major shame. The fact that this is sort of being outshone by a set 1 card. But yeah, it is what it is. Then we've got Daddy Marston's. This is a 4/5. Don 1 at the end of turn, set this character as active. This is good in sealed, but outside of that, it's just not worth the Texas Brindle, to be honest. It's far too easy to deal with a card like this nowadays, in terms of the stats, in terms of the cost. It's just vulnerable to a huge number of things, and as a result, it's probably not worth playing. There are better versions that we have in the set, even. Here it is. Diamantes. This is a 5/6 blocker. That Don 1 at the end of turn, if you have 2 more active Dons, that this character is active. So this is just better in every single way. It's only costs 1 more, but you get a 1k counter, you get 1k extra stats, you get blocker, you get the ability to restand in the context of Doffy, which is the only deck you'd really be playing this in over 7 cost Kid. Yeah, I mean, night and day difference. I think Diamante is a really, really powerful card that you are going to be playing in every single Doffy deck. But Daddy Marston is just not worth the space. And then we got Dellinger. There's a 3/4, 1k counter, end of your turn, set up to one of your Don cards as active. This is a cute card in the sense that, like, yeah, oh, okay, cool, you get the extra Don, wow, that's so good, but, I mean, this is a pretty bad card, kind of easy to remove, not great offensively, you kind of just have to dedicate the Don and just leave it there, and then it doesn't necessarily do anything proactively, you have to build your deck around it, and then if you don't see it, then your deck can either, that functions way worse, because you've built your deck around it, in which case, oh, that's bad, or functions the same, in which case, why are you wasting your deck space doing this? So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a bit of a bait card. I saw people running an Isho initially, but I mean, again, like it just feels really bad. Yes, it is nice to have that Don at the end of your turn always, but is it worth this? Doubtful. Then we've got Treble. This is a 6/6 on play, count to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 5 or less, and when the opponent attacks for 2, set up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less as rested. So I think this card is pretty good, again, in the context of Doffy. Popping 5 cost or lower as an on-play is very, very nice, and having the versatility to use this effect is decent. I think, you know, again, it's one of those cards that it makes much more sense in Doffy than in anything else. Outside of Doffy, I mean, yes, you do get some additional reach. I would really always rather play an X-Drake. It's 1 cost less, and it has a 1k counter extra, even if it does have a slightly lower range in what it's able to KO. But yeah, just a little bit of an awkward card, just not as good, I think. Then we've got 10 cost Doflamingo. So this is a 10/10 on play. A total of 3 of your opponent's rested characters or leaders do not become active during your opponent's next refresh phase. Basically, this is only good against bad players, in my experience. Because the moment I see the Doffy, like, leader or green in general, I should be aware this is a thing that might come up, and I should not be putting myself in the situation where I'm just going to get blown out by this card. The stats on it are not phenomenal, and it's reliant on your opponent essentially being greedy, right? Like, if your opponent is just like, obviously, so, you know, the reverse argument to that is, oh, but its very existence is forcing my opponent to only do a limited number of attacks, which I understand. But equally, like, I just think its stats aren't, you know, it's a 10/10. It's one of the worst stats you're getting on a 10 drop. With an effect that it doesn't remove anything, it just slows the game down, and all you do is establish 10k 10k body, which is like, I mean, okay, I'll just throw down a 2-cost blocker on my next turn, and what did you really accomplish? Like, I just think that this is a card that reads like it should be very, very good, and it just isn't as good as you would hope. I think there's potential for it. You know, if we get more ways to, obviously the idea is, right, like if you're using things like sugar to forcibly rest your opponent's units and then they never get to act and then your opponent just sort of sits there sad, I appreciate what they were trying to do. I think the bits aren't there to make it happen all the time, and it is just one of those cards that's very, very good against newer players who aren't playing around this sort of thing, and probably not so good against established players who know the matchup, but definitely I think it is a scary card. It's fine. Then we've got a 2k counter, Baby 5. At the end of your turn, you may trust character set up to 2 of your Dons as active. Generally, you are just going to be using this as a 2k counter, because it'd be a bit weird to dedicate a Don to this, just to not do anything with it. Then we got Macvice. This is a 4/5, 1k counter. On play, if your leader's Don Quixote Pirates, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, then set up to one of your Don cards active at the end of the turn. This is actually a pretty decent effect. You're getting quite a lot on this body, but, you know, do you really want to be dedicating deck space to this? I'm doubtful. I really do think, like, getting an immediate on-play Okiku is definitely worth something. I don't want to sleep on that. But the fact it is, like, only a one-time thing, and, like, how much value is that extra Don really going to be at the stage of the game when this effect is super good? Doubtful. I think it's a decent card. Definitely decent, but nothing better than that. And then we got Lao Ji. This is a 4/5, 1k counter. At the end of your turn, if you have 3 or more active Don, carry up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 3 or less. Obviously, there is potential. Worth saying, because this says end of your turn, if you are able to structure, if we do get a deck in the future where you're able to do cost reductions that are active during your turn, the reach of this card becomes much greater. So, for example, in Isho, if you're able to trigger this and you've got like a, for example, a Kuzan out, well, suddenly this is just going to be nuking almost anything, because it'll be targeting 8 costs, even because it's your turn when this effect triggers. But at the moment, it's not really something that's super relevant. It's, you know, again, fairly easy to play around. You sort of have to, you kind of are forced to make it happen. That being said, you know, it's definitely not bad. It's just like you have all these Doflamingo family cards that are fine, and I would rather be playing film stuff, which I know is good, which is much more consistent. You know, that's the sort of the bind you find yourself in. And the last character here is Don Quixote Rocinante. This is an 8/8, no counter. Opponent's turn, if this character is rested, your active characters with a base cost of 5 cannot be KO'd by effects. And then on play, you may rest this character, play up to 1 green character card with a cost of 5 from your hand. I get what they were going for this. I think it's a cute card. I just don't think it's worth the space. You know, like, the idea is obviously, right, you play this, you rest it, and you throw out a 5 cost, so you're getting a huge amount of stat value for on the turn you play this, and then after that you're getting just an 8k body you can just throw into stuff, and it's protecting your 5ks from just being hard removed. I get what it's going for. The problem is I'm always going to look at something like Sabo and go, well, I could just play Sabo and get the same benefit, and I'm also getting a 5/6 blocker. In any deck with access to black, for example. I know this doesn't apply for the green comparison, but, you know, because this isn't really a great card in something like Doflamingo, it's much better outside of that. But, I mean, I think there is potential here, maybe in lore. Hey, who knows? There's potential for this in lore. But I think it's something we should be aware exists, but no, I'm not convinced it's anything that crazy. And finally, we'll move on to the events. So firstly, we've got Spiderweb. This is a 2-cost event. Counter up to one of your leaders or characters gains 4k, then set up to one of your characters as active, and the trigger up to one of your leaders gains 2k power during this turn. This is very, very good. This is probably the only event I've seen every single film Doffy like deck play. Like, it's just still super good. You know, like, it is a very, very powerful effect to be reactivating blockers, generally speaking. Then we got the Don Quixote family Searcher. So this is a counter timing Searcher, which I think is really, really interesting, and I like that that's how they did it. I think, you know, we're going to have to wait and see how things shake out in the future with the Don Quixote family stuff, because it doesn't really see much play in OP04, but in OP05 it might do, and this might become a lot better. At the moment it doesn't see play because the cards it's searching aren't so good, but it was, you know, you got to wait and see. Then we got Flapping Threads. This is a 2-cost event. If your leader is Don Quixote Pirates, up to one of your leader or characters gains 2k during this turn. So obviously it's cost 2, but if you're a 7k base for the turn, this can be very, very powerful. And then the trigger KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 4 or less. If we're ever in a rush-based meta, this is going to be incredibly good. So definitely worth being aware it exists. And then finally, we have got the weak do not have the right to choose how they die. This is a 5-cost event. Main and counter, rest up to one of your opponent's leaders or characters, then KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 6 or less. And the trigger sets 5 Dons active. That trigger is almost certainly never going to matter, but being able to just rest a leader or character, then KO something, is potentially very, very, very powerful. This can just stop you dying sometimes. It's a very, very expensive event. Obviously, you have to dedicate a lot of Don to it, but it can potentially be worth it, and I definitely have seen it see play and been fairly successful. So overall, to sort of summarize on green, definitely a lot of good cards here. Some very, very interesting new decks. In particular, Doflamingo is a major meta portion, even though it's not necessarily something I consider to be the top of the meta. I think it's definitely something you need to be aware of, because you can get cooked if you don't practice the matchup at all. I think it's, yeah, definitely really, really important to learn. I think Isho is sort of fine. I think there's a lot of very, very good cards in green, some very meta relevant ones. I think the best card green got is probably Diamante. That card is really, really powerful. And then probably 10 cost Doffy after that, and then some of the events. Definitely some really, really interesting ones here. Sugar, obviously, very, very good as well. If you guys found this video useful, please do like it, subscribe to the channel for more One Piece card game content. Again, check out my Patreon for the full breakdown of every color now. But if you do want to hang around and just wait for the next one, please do subscribe to the channel to be notified when that goes live. That is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.